We begin today on Daf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. Sagt the Heilige Mishnah. Ha'aymer le'ishtay, a person says to his wife, Kol ha-nedarim shetaduri, any nedarim that you will make, mikan at she'avay mimakom ploini, from this place, meaning when I leave this place, until I come back from whatever distance, whatever location I'm going to. So he's basically talking to his wife about any nedarim that she'll make when he's away. He's preempting anything that she might do. We discussed this already before. We had this quoted before. The Gemara here. This is the Mishnah. So harehein kayamin. So he tells her. He said those nedarim that you'll make in this time period, I validate them now. Let it be. It should take effect. Leya maklum. He said nothing. You cannot preempt to validate a neder before it's in existence. You can't validate something that doesn't exist. That's pashut. But how about if he said, Harei mufarin, he tells her in advance, whatever nedarim you make should be nullified. Rabbi Eliezer says, mufar. He could nullify the nedarim that she'll make in advance. The Chachamim say, einu mufar. He cannot nullify those nedarim in advance. Rabbi Eliezer says in this, he has the following kavachayim. If the husband has the power to nullify nedarim that already became in effect, so shouldn't he have the power to nullify nedarim that did not take effect yet? What's easier? It's easier to nullify nedarim that are already here, the isser is already here, or to nullify what's not here yet. It should be easier to nullify what's not here yet. So therefore, this is the source that you could be mefer. So the Ran over here explains this kavachayim only works regarding nullifying. So you could say that you could nullify something that's not in existence yet, but to validate doesn't work that way. Validate the svara is punkt faket. Something that's here, I can validate. If it's not here yet, there's no svara to validate. Why is it again?
Why should it be easier?
Because if it's not ba'olam yet, so the fact that the husband has control over his wife and he has control over her to tell her that whatever nedarim you will make from the first place should never take effect. So he's stopping it from not taking effect in the first place. Okay, the concept of dov shlei ba'olam is not. But if there's no isser here yet, then he's telling you the words that you're going to say will not have the power to create an isser. If he could take the words that she said that created an isser and remove the isser of those words, for him to say in advance that those words should not make an isser, for sure he has the power. That's the svara of Rabbi Eliezer.
Yeah, but the question is, as long as he didn't hear anything,
he
can always be mefer. Correct?
He has the b'yayim shamay mitzad shmiya. Okay, so this, you're right. If you remember, the Gemara brought this up before already, this concept, and Ataka discussed regarding whether he has to hear, maybe he doesn't have to hear. We had that discussion already before. Does he have to hear b'poil? The Gemara there had a svara to say that maybe you don't have to hear b'chlal. This that it says in the Torah b'yayim shamay, it doesn't mean it's not ma'akav that you must hear in order to be mefer. So then he can be mefer the nedarim in advance.
But he goes right. But it could always be made for later on.
It could, but the question is, he wants to do it in advance. Will it take effect in advance? That's the shayla. So Rabbi Eliezer says, yeah.
Okay.
On that, Chachamim answer, Amru Loi. Chachamim say, no, this doesn't work because the pasuk says, Isha yikimenu, v'isha yifirenu. Her husband validates, her husband nullifies. So we compare the two. Esha balaklal hokem, a neder that exists, and therefore he could validate. Balaklal hofer. It also is already in the world that you could nullify. Loy balaklal hokem. If it's not a neder that's here that you can validate, loy balaklal hofer. You can't nullify it either. Okay, so the Gemara now will ask over here an Ibaya, which will go the next amud and a half, or blot and a half maybe, whatever, how long this goes over here. A discussion, V'nigei to Shittas Rabbi Eliezer. How do we understand exactly what Rabbi Eliezer is saying here? So the Shaila was asked to Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Meichol Cholin. Does Rabbi Eliezer mean to say, when this husband is nullifying these nedarim in advance, does that mean that nedarim his wife makes actually takes effect when she makes the neder, the words of her neder create an isser? Ubetailen. But because the husband said in advance that those nedarim I made for them, so it takes effect for a moment and then it becomes batal. Or perhaps lechol and klal doesn't take effect at all because the husband in advance was made for them. So when she says those words, the isser of the neder doesn't take effect in the first place. Nothing. So the Gemara says, "L'may nafkemina." What difference is it if it takes effect for a moment or not? But Poel Mamish now, the neder did not take effect. Sagt the Gemara, Kagoin, the Atfis Achrine Bahadei Nidra. If you're coming to be matfis, if you remember what we learned in the beginning of the Masechta, the idea of hatfasa, when you have one neder and someone else comes and says that something else should be like this. He's sort of transferring the Isser from what's already Yasser to this. Or the Ran over here brings the example that fits into the Pshat of the Gemara here. Let's say if the Isha said, I am a Nazir, that's her neder, and someone else comes and says, and I should also be like her. So the question is, this is a neder she made when her husband already in advance had said that all the nedarim you make should be batal. So what happens now? One moment, well, let's just see there what the Gemara is saying here. If you're going to say that the neder she made to be a nazir, for example, took effect, elamai, afterwards it becomes batal. So havit fisusa. So then, if another person comes and says, and I want to be like you, so then he'll become a nazir like her. But if you're going to say, when she says, I'll be a nazir, her words are meaningless. It doesn't take effect in the first place. So then, there's nothing here. There's no, you can't be matvis. Another person can't come and say, I'll be a nazir like her. Okay? But now the Ran explains this Gemara here, because the Ran said, we already learned before in the Gemara, that if you have something that right now is mutter, if I have a piece of meat that was a carbon, but now it's not, it's mutter already, like by carbon after the zrika of the dam, and it's mutter now, and I come and say that something else should be asr, like this piece of basar, if now it's mutter, it's mutter. So over here, l'chayre the nafkamina of the Gemara is not an nafkamina, because b'payel mamish, today it's mutter. She says she's going to be a nazir, and a moment later, she's not a nazir anymore, and someone else comes and says, and I'm going to be like her. But a moment later, she's anyways not a nazir. So why is the Gemara saying that it should work? We learned it a few times before. So the Rana answers it's not the same thing. The Rana says, by a piece of basar, if you remember the lashon of the Gemara was, a person says, zeh kazeh. This piece of meat should be like this piece of meat. So for that you say, even if this piece of meat was originally aser, but the fact that today it's mutter, so it's not going to be aser. But over here it's different. You're not saying zeh kazeh. Over here, like I said, we're talking about a case of a nazir. A person says, hareini nazir. And your friend hears how someone said that any nazir. And your friend says, me as well, ani, me too. So the question is, when you said va'ani, will it work to be a nazir like that person? So over here, you're not trying to compare yourself to that person to say that I'm like him. You're you and he's he. Lamashal over here. You have a isha, she's a woman, then you have another person, he's a man. When you're coming to say that I'm like him, you're not coming to say that I'm like him. You're coming to say that this nazirus that this person said should be on me also. Over here the Ran says that nazirus will go on you. Mashenkin by the basar, when you say zeh kazeh, you're trying to make one piece of basar like another piece of basar. Then it's not going to work. That's one that the Ran says. Another interesting point that Ran points out over here is that l'chayre, there's another klal, and we learned this before in the Gemara a few times. Anytime you mata a neder, so if you mata the first neder, any additional nedarim that followed and are dependent on the previous neder automatically fall apart as well. Right? If you remember, if it's like a chain, so the beginning of the link falls apart, everything else falls apart as well. So over here, even if you're going to say that her neder took effect for a moment, but the husband was Mavatal was made for that neder. Of another person comes and says he should be like the Isha, so the neder of that other person should automatically fall apart with the hafara of the husband. So the Ran answers an interesting thing, a very important point. He says it depends. When you have a hafara of a chacham, which is really called in the lashon of the Gemara a hatara of a chacham, the hatara of a chacham works retroactively. It's a pesach, it uproots the whole neder. So then I say, if you uproot the first original neder, all the other nedarim that come as a result of it also fall apart. Over here we're talking about the hafara of a husband. The hafara of a husband works mikan ulahaba. It doesn't uproot the neder lamafreya. So therefore you could say that her neder gets uprooted, but the other person that said that he's going to be like her naziris, for example, that neder has a place to take effect, and it will not become uprooted with the Baal Zafara. So that's the Gemara Shaila here. How does it work? Is it chatchila not chal, or is it chal and it gets nullified? Tashama. So the Gemara says, let's look in the words of the Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Eliezer said the following: Kal v'chaymer. If the husband has a power to nullify nedarim that already came into the world, they're already here, they're aser. Shouldn't he have the power to be made for nedarim that are not in effect yet, that are not here yet? So what do you see? What does this kal v'chaymer mean? Shmamina, don't you understand from here that loy chalem? that what he's saying is that the Nedarim she didn't make yet did not take effect yet at all. And therefore, when you're made for the neder, the koyach that you have, the husband has to be made for the Nedarim, is that it should not take effect in the first place. So the emes is, the Ran says that in the Lashon of the Mishnah, you don't clearly see this. It's not clear. Gemara is not trying to prove this from the actual Lashon HaMishnah. Rather, the Gemara is trying to prove this misvara. What the Gemara is saying at this point is, if you're going to say that even here, when the husband is being made for the Nedarim in advance, the way this works is, the Neder is Chal. Elamai, a moment later, he's uprooting it. So then what's this Kal V'chomer? You're saying if after you made the Neder, he could uproot it, or he could nullify it. For sure, before in advance, he could also nullify it. Why? It's the same thing. Even if he's nullifying it in advance, it's also first taking effect, and then only afterwards is it becoming nullified. So it's the same thing like every neder, that you nullify it after the fact. So the Gemara right now understands that the Kal V'chomer is that over here he's nullifying it, that it shouldn't take effect in the first place. And that's what he's saying, that it's a stronger koyach. It's a stronger koyach you have to prevent it from happening in the first place. So that shows that it never takes effect. So the Gemara answers, no, not necessarily. Mi katani, does it say in the Mishnah, she'enan boin, that it will never come into effect? That's not what it says. It says shaloi ba'u. Now, when the husband is nullifying it, it didn't yet come into effect. Adayin loi ba'u. That's what it means. It didn't yet take effect, but it will come into effect. And after it will come into effect, then the husband will nullify it. So the Ran explains, but it's still a Kal V'chomer, even though by every neder, you're nullifying it after she makes the neder. And over here, the way the nullification works is only after it takes effect, but it's still much stronger here, because the Ran says, by a regular neder, when she makes the neder, there was no hafara that the husband said. There was no actual hafara that was already there in the world in advance. So the neder is like a powerful neder. Mashenkin over here, when she makes already the neder, it's like a neder that's created with a blemish. It's a neder created with that hafara that's sort of waiting to uproot it right away. So therefore the whole neder in the first place is not as strong as a neder. So that's what he's saying. So for sure in such a case where he already said the hafara in advance, that you have a power to nullify it.
The Mishnah starts off saying,
That's about validating the neder. That's about validating a neder. We're not talking about that. The validating, he for sure doesn't have the power to validate in advance. We're talking about nullifying.
Okay, now okay, so he said, in other words, you can't make any Nedarim.
Right.
But she
Basically,
made one.
Correct.
So what she made is nothing really. She didn't make an neder.
Well, that's basically what the Gemara is discussing, right?
I don't know. The Gemara is saying that what she said has a basis, and I'm thinking it has no basis.
Okay, so that's what they're discussing. Look, the pashtos, a husband can't stop his wife of actually saying a neder, of making an actual neder. She makes the actual neder. She's going to make the neder. He can't stop her of actually doing that. Question though is, when it says that he can be made for it in advance, what does that mean? Does it mean that her words become like empty words, meaningless words? That's the way you're understanding it. But maybe it's different. Maybe he can't stop her from saying words that create a neder. Her words have the power of creating a neder. All the husband could do is to be made for. The moment it takes effect, so then he can be made for the effect of the neder. But the power of the etzem words itself, he can't change that. The words have the power to make an isser. That's the discussion of the Gemara here. Okay, let's see weiter. Let's see the next raya here. Sagt the Gemara, Tarshama, I'll bring you a raya from a braisa. And over here, there's a little bit of a different kind of Kal V'chomer that Rabbi Eliezer said to prove his opinion. Amen la Rabbi Eliezer said as follows. Uma b'mokim she'ein meifeh nidrei atzmai. If the halach is that a person cannot nullify his own nedarim, misha nadar. After you make a neder, there's no way you can nullify your own nedarim. In other words, there's the lav, la yachal devari. You make a neder, you got to keep your neder. You can't nullify it yourself. But nevertheless, meifeh nidrei atzmai atshelo yadar. You have the power to nullify your nedarim before you make a neder, right? You can make a condition in advance that whatever nedarim I'll make in the future should not take effect. We learned this in the Gemara before. There was a Mishnah that said that a person Rosh Hashanah says that for the whole year. That's the source of the concept of ataris nedarim or kol nidrei. So after you make the neder, you can't nullify your nedarim. But you could, in advance, you could make a t'nai that your neder shouldn't take effect. So if so, if it's a place, if the halach is regarding this neder of your wife, that you could nullify her nedarim after she makes the neder, ain't it din? So most definitely, the halach should be, you should be able to nullify her nedarim before she makes the neder. That's the kal v'chomer that Rabbi Eliezer said in this brayse. So now the Gemara says, okay, we can see from here how he understood this, what this hafar in advance does. My love, don't you think that you learn out from here the ishtoi dumya delay regarding being mefer, his wife's nedarim in advance is similar to himself. Mahu, just like regarding the person himself, the loy chaylen, when you make that condition in advance that the neder should not be chal, so then if later on in the year you make a neder, the neder doesn't take effect in the first place. Af ishtoi, so too, and the Gemara is comparing this the same by your wife. Nami loy chaylen. Doesn't it mean that Rabbi Eliezer is saying here that it shouldn't take effect in the first place, just like it is by yourself? So we have a clear eye here that it doesn't take effect. So the Gemara answers, loy, not necessarily. We have this kal v'chomer, but we're not comparing the extent or the way how it doesn't affect. How it doesn't take effect, it's not the same thing. Each one is the way it is. Regarding a person that's made for his own nedarim in advance. So over there, the nedarim he makes, taka does not take effect at all. And regarding his wife's nedarim, over there, maybe the way a husband could be made for his wife's nedarim in advance is not by uprooting and turning his wife's words into empty words in the first place. No, the neder takes effect, and only then does it get uprooted. So you can't necessarily compare. One second. So the Ran explains what the Gemara is really saying here, because in the end of the day, there's a kal v'chomer here. So if this is a kal v'chomer, so why shouldn't we say that the kal v'chomer teaches this to me? Just like over there by the person himself, so when he uproots it in advance, it uproots it completely, and it's not a neder in the first place. Why shouldn't we say it's the same thing regarding when you uproot your wife's nedarim in advance, that it should mean that it's not a neder in the first place? So the Ran says the logic over there does not apply to a wife, and the reason is very pashut, because why taka? What's this koyach a person has to say in advance that the nedarim that I'm going to make this year should not take effect? What's that koyach? It's based on the idea of nidrei ta'os. If you remember, we learned before in the Gemara, a person makes a neder, and the whole neder he made was something that he made a mistake. He didn't realize the neder doesn't take effect in the first place. If a person made a condition in the beginning of the year that I don't want any nedarim to take effect, and what happened then? He went and made a neder. What does that mean? He forgot the condition he made. So really the whole neder that he made is really a mistake. The moment he realizes that he made that condition, he doesn't want any neder to take effect. So that means that the words that he said of the neder are meaningless, because the whole thing is a neder tos. That's the reason why, b'negei a person himself, the neder gets uprooted. Mashenkin, regarding a wife, you can't say such a thing. You can't say the svara that because the husband is nullifying it in advance, and therefore regarding his wife, the neder shouldn't be, it's a mistake. You can't say the svara that the neder that his wife makes is a mistake. Just because the husband says he doesn't want the neder, it doesn't make the words that his wife decides to say a mistake. It's not a mistake. She wants this neder. So over here, the svara is that it does not get uprooted in advance. That's what the Gemara says. Okay, the Ran has a shtickle more of a discussion of how exactly this kal v'chomer works, but that's the taich of the words of the Gemara, hakadisa.
That's why we can't say the same question about maybe you can do it for Achrina.
The what? And the husband is no such a thing, Taka. Exactly. Over there gets nullified in advance. Yeah. The whole thing is a mistake. The whole thing is a mistake. Exactly. Okay, there's another shtickle here in the Gemara, but I think we'll leave it for tomorrow. This is a Toshama that goes into half of the next Amud, as you see, and Mitzvah Shem tomorrow.